the discovery of alien life would be one of the more significant events in human history. Real science would love to discover real aliens, but the evidence just isn't there.
Ladies and gentlemen, today I've got Mick West on the line, and I'm super thrilled about this. Mick is a science writer and an investigator and has worked a ton looking into other possible explanations and attempting to verify the veracity of the claims being made in the UFO and UAP community. He's been featured in a ton of very reputable news sites and very reputable publications, and I'm very happy that he's here with us today. So, Mick, I thought while we talk, maybe you could just give us a quick little bio to let us know who you are. And then I thought we would talk both about the recent hearings that were happening in the U.S., a little bit about these Peruvian space mummies that were trotted out before Mexican Congress, and a little bit about this atmosphere of reflexive conspiracism that we all live in today, where any claim is accepted so long as part of that claim is the government is lying to you.
Sure.
So who are you?
Okay, well, I'm Mick West. My background, my deep background, I guess, is that I used to be a video game programmer many, many years ago. And I did that for a few decades and then kind of retired and took up writing. And one of the things I did initially was write about conspiracy theories on the internet. Which is, as you know, it's kind of a minefield of various different peoples and opinions. I started a number of blogs. I did one on the chemtrails conspiracy theory, which is the theory that the government is spraying us with things out of airplanes. Those long trails you see in the sky, they claim are not actually contrails, which is what they actually are. And they think there's some kind of secret spraying plot. Then I moved on to various other conspiracy theories, like 9/11 conspiracy theories and various other things, wrote a book about it. And I eventually found myself spending more and more time looking into UFOs, specifically UFO videos. So I find them very interesting because it kind of it ties in a lot with the work I used to do as a video game programmer, because the mathematics that you use is exactly the same. It's very basically simple, straightforward trigonometry. Like something's in 3 dimensions, how do you convert it into 2 dimensions so it appears on the screen? Or if you're just seeing something on a screen, how do you figure out where that is in a 3D world? So it was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed solving the puzzle. And I also enjoyed meeting the UFO community. Lots of a wide variety of interesting people in the UFO community.
What would be the sort of archetypes of people in the UFO community? I mean, we've all got the various stereotypes in mind, but would you say that they are easily dividable into 2 or 3 or 4 major groups?
Well, you could split them in 2 ways, I guess. Well, one simple way of splitting them into 2 groups is people who've had some kind of UFO experience and people who haven't. And a large number, I'm not really, I should do a survey and try to figure this out, but like a large percentage of the people who are UFO enthusiasts or believers or fans are people who have had some kind of UFO experience themselves. Typically, they've seen something. They were out at night and they saw something in the sky, sometimes in the daytime, and for them it was a very meaningful experience, and they probably were not believed by a lot of people, even though they saw something. We don't know what they saw, but it becomes this thing that kind of underlies all their beliefs. And there's other people who haven't had any experience like that. And they're more interested in, they've read a lot of books on UFOs, or they've seen videos, or they're just really interested in the topic for some reason, but they haven't actually had some experience themselves. And then obviously there's some overlap between those 2 groups, but those are the two main types. And the first one, I think, is perhaps the more important in a way, because I want to say important, but they're very, very emotionally invested in it. And so talking to them. Are you
calling me a liar? I saw this.
It can be difficult. It's like, and it's true, of course. Like, they saw something, or they thought they saw something, and I wasn't there, so I can't tell them what they saw or what they didn't. I could offer a few suggestions, but they've probably heard it all before. So it makes it very, very challenging to discuss their cases with them.
Hmm. Well, do you think? I mean, we're jumping out of order here, but that's totally fine. Uh, when people saw something, what do you think happened? I mean, certainly there's. I mean, something I keep in mind, especially the last couple of years, is that background rates of schizophrenia in society are somewhere between 1 in 200 and 1 in 100 to 1 in 200 people. So I'm not saying everybody who's seen a UFO is schizophrenic. I'm not saying that at all.
Yeah.
But are a, there are a fair number of some of those sightings have to be due to mental disorders.
Well, not even necessarily really mental disorders. People can have some kind of hallucination,
Mm,
and it doesn't mean there's necessarily really anything particularly wrong with them. It happens in a very simple way, like when you're falling asleep. Sometimes you'll see something in the room, and you think that it's
mm,
actually there. This is like a very, very common type of hallucination that lots of people have had. And people may well just have temporarily altered brain states for whatever reason. Yes, if you've had a few drinks, perhaps, or you've been taking drugs, your brain might react to things in a different way. You might just be tired, or it might just be something happened and your brain is caught off guard. I think everyone's had experiences where they're looking at something and they can't quite figure out what it is, and then suddenly it snaps into view. Like you realize, like what I thought was just in front of my eyes is actually way further over there, or
mm.
I'm focusing on one thing when I should be focusing on the other thing. So I really would hesitate to kind of jump to mental illness
Yeah.
as any kind of cause within the community, because these are things that just happen to everyone. Of course, just like in the non-UFO community, a percentage of people are going to have something, because mental illness of various stripes is common throughout society. Like a significant portion of people have had at least some kind of mental illness. But yeah, it's kind of like normal human failings. Yeah, optical illusions or tricks of the brain, like hallucinations that can just really happen to anyone. And when people see things in the sky, it's kind of like it's a snapshot type thing. It gets kind of embedded in their brain, and because they didn't have their cameras with them, well, if they did have their cameras with them, they didn't use them. That memory becomes what happened. But an interesting thing with UFOs is that when you have cases where you have eyewitness accounts and you have photographs, and perhaps the eyewitness didn't know there was photographs. If you look at the photographs later, it doesn't really tie in with what the eyewitnesses saw. And whenever we do have good evidence like photographs, it tends to kind of strip away the mystery of whatever we saw. UFOs exist only because we don't have good data on them. We have these very, very imperfect perceptions, these imperfect human perceptions, or we have very bad photographs.
Well, it's certainly something I've not dug nearly as deeply into the UFO community as you have, but one common sort of admission within that community is our biggest problem is the fact that everybody is carrying around a 4K camera these days, and there's no good 4K camera footage
Yeah.
of these things. It's all some blurry dot. It's all some bright white object. And I do want to talk about the specifics of the gimbal camera footage that you've analyzed. But I think, to be fair, the UFO community generally does acknowledge that if that there's some kind of problem. Why are we not being able to? Why are regular people not able to film high quality videos of this?
Yeah, and I think I don't think they acknowledge it as the real problem that it actually is. I mean, really, for me, I think it's a big clue. The fact that we haven't got good footage of a UFO, despite the vast expansion. I have a book called the UFO Handbook, which was written in the 1970s, and it describes this issue. And they're talking about, like, why don't we have good photos of UFOs? I mean, lots of people have cameras. Why don't we have good photos of it? And that was written in the 1970s, when of course hardly anybody was walking around with a camera, and even if they were, they had a little Instamatic or something, which wasn't very good. But now we've literally got like 1 million times as much camera power. We've got these incredibly powerful phones that can take 4K video, 60 frames per second. They can zoom in. Some of them can zoom in a really, really long way. iPhone 5 just came out. The iPhone 15 just came out with a 5 times optical zoom, but that's already existed in many phones like the Galaxy S21 through S23. I've had it for like 2 or 3 years. 10 times optical zoom, 100 times digital zoom. Yeah, so these amazing cameras have been out there, millions and millions and millions of amazing cameras, billions of just regular cameras, and no good video. Where we just have these little blurry dots. So yeah, the UFO community kind of acknowledges it, but they don't admit what it really means, which is that it's a very strong indication that what we think of as UFOs are just things that we don't have very good information about. They try to make excuses. They say, well, UFOs appear mostly to the military because they're only interested in the military. But then you got to say, why are people seeing UFOs all the time? If people see a UFO, you should be able to take a photo of it. And they say, well, cameras don't take very good photos at night. Well, a lot of UFOs appear during the daytime. Sometimes if you're seeing a UFO at night, it's something that's making amazing maneuvers. Why can't we see those amazing maneuvers being made? And why can't we see it from 2 different people? That would be kind of the gold standard. Multiple people seeing the same UFO performing amazing maneuvers and taking video of it. So there's a huge problem. There's a huge problem in ufology, and all we get really are attempts to explain it away, when I think it's pretty much impossible to explain away.
It seems that in the last couple of years that, I mean, probably since forever, conspiracy theories are self-sealing. If there's evidence, well, that's evidence of the conspiracy theory. If there's no evidence, then that's also evidence of the conspiracy theory, because of course whoever they are, have gone and removed the evidence. So it's almost disprovable. Does that happen in the UFO? Are there people saying, well, the UFOs, their technology is so advanced that they can wipe the camera footage?
Yeah, essentially. I mean, some people go as far as saying that UFOs aren't really physical objects. They're more like a projection of a type of reality directly into your brain. So what you are seeing isn't going to be what your camera is seeing. So yeah, you get all these kind of excuses like the UFOs don't want to be seen. They always appear at night. But it really boils down to, unless it is some kind of magical thing like that, that if you can see something, you can take a photograph of it. And yes, like one of the excuses people give is that, it happens too quickly and I didn't have time to get my camera out. But then you get accounts of people like watching a UFO for a long period of time, things moving slowly overhead. It can't just be happening every single time. Like people say, UFO hypnotized me, so I couldn't take my camera out. But, we get tens
maybe you're just falling asleep
of UFO reports. Yeah, maybe so. But I've had encounters. Well, not encounters. I've had an experience where I saw this amazing thing in the sky once, and that at one time, like I saw this giant golden shower of things flying across the sky, and I gawked at it for a second. Then I realized that I had my phone in my hand, and so I started recording, and I recorded it go across the entire sky, and then it disappeared over the horizon. And I thought, got it. And I looked at my phone, and I actually hadn't hit the button, so I missed the entire thing. So that happens. But is it going to happen every single time?
The UFOs forced you to not hit the button while thinking that you had, clearly.
Yeah, it wasn't the UFO. It was some space junk. It was like, Chinese rocket re-entering or something like that. It was very, very impressive, and I really regret missing it.
So we're talking about anecdotal evidence here, and obviously interacting with somebody who has seen something, they're very fervently attached to that. But for kind of evaluating the levels of evidence, I think some of the strongest evidence for UFOs, by which we really mean, or mostly mean, aliens, would be this argument that there are trained observers, like in the military, right? Especially in the light of the recent hearings. So that the evidence from, quote, trained observers is put up here. Then I'm guessing the next level of evidence is the grainy videos from the FLIR cameras or whatnot. Then comes the evidence from regular people, untrained observers. And then beyond that is it would kind of get down into the muck a little bit that, well, I heard from a guy who told me that there's secret evidence that he can't show me, but he promised that, it's second or third hand evidence that that they can't actually present. Is that kind of the evidence hierarchy, or am I missing
Kind
a
of,
couple
yeah,
levels?
but it depends on who you talk to as to how they would structure that. Because I think a lot of people now recognize that anecdotal evidence isn't very good, the videos aren't very good, and so they actually fall back on what you described as the lowest level of evidence, which is people saying that there's secret evidence somewhere, and they point to the various things that the government has done. They would say, why would the government pass this legislation if there's nothing to see? Why would they form a UAP task force if there's no actual evidence? And so the secret evidence, the evidence the government supposedly have, becomes for them the most important evidence. But really, when you look at what's actually come out of the government, time and time again, we have various government agencies saying there's no evidence of extraterrestrials. There's no evidence of things performing, no unambiguous evidence of things performing these amazing maneuvers. There's indications of things happening, but we can't tell if it's instrument error or whatever. So the public-facing side of that is very unambiguously saying, no, there's no aliens. UFOs, they're kind of interesting. We don't know what they all are, but we don't think that they're aliens, and we don't really even know if they're doing anything particularly amazing. But then they think that there must be an extra level. There must be an extra level beyond that. The government must be hiding things, and there must be some kind of secret. But then all we have there really essentially is mythology and some claims. Probably the most significant, of course, has been David Grush, the whistleblower, so-called whistleblower, who, as you kind of said, is really only saying things that other people told him. And he has somehow become convinced by some people that we have an alien crash retrieval program. That's, we have a bunch of flying saucers that we recovered, and they're in hangars, and we've been reverse engineering them for decades. But there's no evidence. So
is the UFOs from the Vatican in the 1930s part of David Grush's conspiracy?
It's actually
claim.
Yeah, it's one of his big things, actually. The story goes that in the city of Magenta in Italy in 1933, a UFO crashed. It wasn't a flying saucer, it was a giant kind of cigar-shaped object. And it was recovered by the Mussolini's government, the Italian government. And then towards the end of World War II, the Pope helped the United States Secret Service kind of spirit it away and take it to a base in America, where they started reverse engineering it and created transistors and stuff like that. But this is a story that's been widely derided as a hoax. It's an Italian hoax, basically. Some guy in Italy came up with these documents which seem probably forged. And that's all the real evidence that there is that this happened. And then it seems like somehow David Grush became convinced it was true. And it's really strange. It's really strange what's going on with Grush. He seems like, he's a high up person, relatively speaking. He was a high up person in the intelligence community. He had a lot of responsibilities. He was trusted to courier the presidential daily briefing to the president. And, he was involved in some of the writing of it, I think. So, he's an important guy, but somehow he's got convinced of these things. And, it doesn't seem at all likely that they're real. And it certainly doesn't seem like there's any evidence. So it's been very interesting to hopefully find out what's going on. I kind of suspect we will never actually find out, but it's very interesting.
Yeah. Well, let's take what I think might be the strongest case for UAPs anyway, behaving in ways that aren't supposed to be allowed by the laws of physics. And I based on my understanding of the field, that would probably be the incident from 2004, where Commander David Fravor was flying his, I think, F-18 off the coast of Southern California. Him and his
Yes.
weapons officer saw a strange white, what they called a tic tac, and then later another F-18 went up and apparently filmed it. So now we've got converging accounts from, I mean, of the levels of evidence. We've got a trained observer, we've got corroboration from somebody else, I think three other people, and we've got video footage. So that's beginning to put together different levels of evidence pointing at something. Can you talk about that? I think that might be very instructive to tease that one apart if you can.
Yeah. Now that case is interesting because it's really three different things, and people kind of conflate them all as being the same thing, like this one thing happened, when they're all actually very, very different things. First of all, there was, before David Fravor's famous encounter with the Tic Tac, there was about a week where the radar operators on the Princeton, which is one of the ships in the Nimitz's fleet, were seeing these strange objects moving around. Well, not really moving around. They were moving in straight lines from north to south. They were off the California coast. California coast is more or less north-south. And these objects were moving in groups of 5. And the operator, Kevin Day, described it as they just basically moved down the screen very slowly, from north to south. So, and they were moving at he calculated 100 knots. 100 knots is about 115 miles per hour. And at that level of that altitude, that's actually fairly similar to wind speed. And of course, the prevailing winds kind of go north-south at that point. So they could have just been things drifting in the wind, or they could have been something else. We don't know what they are, and we never figured out what they were. And for a while, no one really was particularly interested in them. They were just these weird radar returns that were moving at very slow speeds, constant altitude, not making any sudden movements or anything like that. And then just, going off the bottom of the screen because they lost them because they went out of range of the radar. Then eventually, Kevin Day, the radar chief, persuaded the captain that they needed to go investigate these things. And so they made the call and had David Fravor, who was already up in the air. It must have been a pretty quick decision. David Fravor, one pilot, and Alex Dietrich, the other pilot, and their 2 backseat weapon systems operators were vectored out to fly towards this group of 5. And so they went towards this group of 5, and they were given directions to one of them because they were fairly widely spaced. They were like a few miles apart. And when they arrived there, initially they couldn't see anything. They were told this thing was moving along north to south, 20,000 feet. They arrived, there was nothing there. Looked around for a little bit, and then they noticed down by the water there was this area of white water, like there was something under the water, like a sea mount, like a small mountain that's underneath the ocean, or a submarine or a whale or something like that. Just that's how it looked like. And then they noticed, this supposedly simultaneously, that there was a little object moving around, and they described it as being a tic-tac object, kind of similar to this type of shape. And they said it was kind of moving around strangely. It didn't look like a regular aircraft or anything. And they watched it for a while. The amount of time that they actually watched it for varies between the pilots. Alex Dietrich doesn't really have a very long recollection. She thinks it was just a few seconds, and David Fravor thinks it was more like 5 minutes. So they're quite divergent in how long the encounter lasted. Then David Fravor decided to go down and take a look. So he flies down, and he says that as he was flying down, the object appeared to fly up, kind of mirroring him. And then he started circling around, and it started circling around him. So they were both looked like, from his perspective, they were both flying around a giant circle. And then he decided he's going to cut across this circle. So he decides to fly straight towards it. And he says it flew straight towards him and then kind of disappeared off over his shoulder, and he lost sight of it. Then they didn't know what it was, so then they returned back to base.
So that's the end of the second thing then? That's
the end of the second thing, essentially. Okay. Well, they heard on the radio, they were told on the radio that the object had reappeared at their cap point, which is some distance away. It's their combat air patrol point. It's just a kind of a rendezvous location. And then they returned back. Then the next flight out was Chad Underwood, another pilot, and I think he was the backseater in the plane. He wasn't actually the pilot. They went up and they were told to look out for UFOs, basically. And at some point, Chet Underwood says he got a ping on his radar and trained his FLIR system in that direction and saw this shape.
What is a FLIR system?
Blob. Yeah, the FLIR system is an infrared camera, very long range infrared camera used for targeting. Targeting things. Basically, it was initially designed to target things on the ground. So, like you're flying around, you focus on a building or a vehicle or something, and then you target it with a laser, and then the missile goes down and blows it up. It was kind of extended for air-to-air combat after that, similar type of thing. So he's in air-to-air mode. He's looking ahead in this very, very magnified view. It's like something like 100 times magnification from a regular camera, and he sees this object on screen. It's not really doing anything. You see it move around in the video, but when you examine the video in detail, it can go frame by frame. You see that all these movements are just coincide with basically camera changes. When something happens to the camera, like it's swapping out one lens to the other, or it has to do a thing called a gimbal roll, a correction it has to do, or is switching from one mode to another. So it switches from the visible light camera to the infrared camera. Every time he does something like that, you see the object move. And at the end of the video, he does another similar change of view, and the object just kind of drifts off because it's lost lock on the object. So it seems like he's just pointing at probably some kind of distant plane of some sort. And because he's just cycling through the camera mode so quickly, it looks like it's moving. And so from all these three things, the radar things moving north to south, the object Tic Tac that was moving around rapidly, and the video, these are three different things. And they show objects that are moving in three very different ways. The first one is showing things that are kind of moving in groups of 5 from north to south at 100 knots. The second one was an account of something that's kind of zigzagging all over the place and then moving around, mirroring their flight, and then flying off at hypersonic velocity, none of which was caught on the radar. And then we have Chad Underwood's thing, which is basically an object which is flying ahead of him and a bit to the left, basically exactly the same speed and kind of level and heading as a regular aircraft. So you have three very, very different things. But because they all happened at the same time, people conflate them all, and they think there's this amazing encounter with one Tic Tac object which did all of these things. It was like, and then there was also reports of it dropping from outer space down to 20,000 feet in a fraction of a second. But that was another thing again. That wasn't part of the same set of things. There was these slow-moving targets, and there was these different targets which was dropping from space. Then there was Fravor's account, and then there was Underwood's video. A bunch of different things that when you put them all together and tell them as one story, as a narrative, it sounds really compelling. But ultimately, it's just three things that happened at the same time, and from that, a legend was born.
Can you take me through? I mean, your claim, and I think your discovery would be that the movements of the object in the video corresponded to the tracking software tracking this object, the lens changes, and the angle of the camera changing. Mm-hmm. How do you prove that? I mean, that's is there mathematics behind that claim?
Yeah, there is. If you look on the video, the Tic Tac video, also called the FLIR 1 video, you'll notice at the top of the screen there is a number which is telling you, it's called the azimuth, which is basically the angle between the front of your plane and the camera. So if it's like, say, 5 degrees right, that means the camera is looking 5 degrees to the right of the front of the plane, and then it moves over to 5 degrees left. And you can see that number change throughout the video. So
the camera itself is on a pivot?
Yeah, the camera's on a pivot.
Okay.
It's actually mounted. It's kind of forward mounted, so it can't pivot smoothly from left to right. It has to do a combination of rolls and pitches, which is more important in the gimbal video. But yeah, you can basically track from left to right. So what we're looking at, the plane we're in, the plane that's taking the video, is just flying in a straight line. and this object is moving from left to right in front of it. Now, you can't really see that when you look at the video. It looks like we're just following an object, but we can see by looking at these numbers changing that it moves across the screen at a certain rate. Then, one thing we notice is that whenever there's a camera change, like we change from infrared to visible light, or we change the magnification by changing the kind of which zoom lens essentially is being used, is the optical path within the camera. We see that the object makes a little movement, and it makes the movement in the same direction that the camera is tracking. And that kind of suggests that the camera has stopped tracking momentarily. The object has just continued moving a little bit, and then the camera retains lock and then continues tracking. See, the thing about this camera is the way it tracks is it's not got some magic tracking thing where it's like got a laser or something tracking the object. It's tracking it by looking at the video, and it's got a little box around it, and it's just tracking it, just like feature tracking in Adobe After Effects or something like that. It's regular motion tracking, but of course back from 2004 it wasn't particularly sophisticated, and so we notice every single time it loses lock a little bit, the object moves to the left. Then finally, when it loses lock for the last time, we see the object move over to the left, and we can actually measure how fast it is moving. And so we can see how many degrees per second it's moving off to the left. And you measure that, and you look at the actual number on the top of the screen. How fast has that been moving from left to right? And it's the same number. So the camera has been tracking this object at a certain angular rate, and then it stops tracking it, and the object continues moving at the exact same angular rate, which suggests it's just been the entire time just tracking that object. So I think that's it's a pretty compelling evidence that that's all that's going on. And of course, the correlation between every single time the object makes a move, there's some kind of camera change, and that's really the only time you see movements. So if you actually look at what's going on frame by frame, it's pretty clear it's not actually making any sort of moves.
So what about the trained observer part of this, where David Fravor and his co-pilot and the other two people all saw something?
Well, pilots are trained observers, and it's true. They're highly skilled people, and they get a lot of training. But what they're trained to observe are other planes and threats, like missiles and things like that. They're not, when they see something that's out of their realm of expertise, that isn't actually something they're trained to do. They're not trained to here's a featureless thing that looks like either a Tic Tac or a propane tank, depending on how far away it is. They're not trained to judge that distance. And Fravor himself said he basically just did a seat of the pants assessment, and he assumed it was correct because he has so much experience. But all of his experience is in seeing other planes, and mostly other FA-18s, because that's what he flies with, and so he's flying in a squadron with other FA-18s. It's not like he's dogfighting enemy planes all the time. He's just flying with his squadron, and the size estimate he gave was the same size as an FA-18, which is just what he would expect. It's just what he's mentally primed to do. So trained observers are generally trained to observe very specific things. Weather observers are trained to observe clouds. Pilots are trained to observe, to spot, basically, other planes. They're not trained to observe UFOs.
So what is it, or what could it be that he saw?
It's hard to say, but I think perhaps the biggest clue of the encounter is his description of how accurately it mirrored his movements. Now, this is something that it would actually happen if what he was seeing wasn't as far away as he thought it was. Now, we're looking at a featureless object. We don't know how far away something is if we don't have anything to compare it with. If it's not, this is next to my head, so it's as far away as my head. But if you didn't know, if it, you don't know how far away it is, it means you don't know how big it is. When things get closer to the camera, they get larger. When they get a lot further away, they get smaller. And if you don't know the distance, you can't tell the size. So he could have been thinking it was 40 feet long when it was only 20 feet long. It could have been something like some kind of balloon or a drone or something like that. It could have been smaller, like 10 feet long. And because he thought he was circling it, that means he was here and he thought it was a mile away. And what if it's, instead of it being a mile away, what if it was only half a mile away? So then when he was actually circling around and he thought it was moving to mirror his movements, it was actually not moving at all. He was just maybe just blowing in the wind a little bit, and he was flying around the entire thing. That would actually completely explain the movements that he described, especially the final movement where he thinks that it's a mile away. It's actually only half a mile away. So when he flies towards it, he's expecting something way over here. He thinks it'll take quite a while for him to get over there. But instead, it seems to accelerate very rapidly towards him. And so it would seem like it did this, when actually it's not moving at all. He's just flying past it. So that parallax illusion would actually explain what happened, especially if he misperceived it, which, because he's not a trained observer in sizing objects of no features, is something that could quite easily have happened.
This is about you, but once upon a time, I was up in Nunavut, so northern Canada, no trees, flat plain, driving rain, fog, so not great visibility. And I was coming down towards Hudson Bay, so I had bears on the brain, much like I imagine a pilot would have planes on the brain. So you're worried about polar bears. And I saw what I assumed it was a tundra grizzly bear on the shore moving. And I was like, I see you. And I paddled a little, I got my shotgun out and I was paddling towards it. And then I shook my head and the rain cleared a little bit. And it was a bald eagle on shore. Maybe I'd assumed it was a grizzly bear a mile away, and it ended up being a bald eagle hopping back and forth, maybe 50 or 100 feet away. And I would say I'm a trained observer of bears, of eagles, and of the tundra landscape. And that size illusion and the inability to judge distance. And these things had features. They weren't some random shape. So I buy that judging the distance to some object, especially when it has no features. In my case, the features were obscured a bit by the rain. Would be very difficult.
There's a big issue here, which is that David Fravor wouldn't admit that he made a mistake, because he's so convinced that he's this really impressive pilot, which he is, but he thinks that makes him incapable of making a mistake in a domain where he really doesn't have any experience. This is a new thing for him. Like flying propane tanks isn't something that he's trained to observe or is that he's had any experience before. But because he's very, very good at these other things, he's an amazing pilot. He can land on a pitching deck and he can do all these incredible things. He thinks that kind of translates to being able to make a very good size estimate and a motion estimate of something which he can't really, because there's no features on it and there's no way of doing it. So he could have made a mistake, but because
it didn't show up on the plane's radar.
No, they didn't get any radar hits at all. So it's that's kind of another interesting thing. And there was no description on the radar of the movements that he saw. He supposedly saw this thing moving around in a mile circle, but and we don't have any description of that on the radar. It seems very much like it was some kind of thing that what they were looking at wasn't what they thought they were looking at, and it wasn't where they thought it was. But it was in 2004, nearly 20 years ago. People's memories become fixed and in some senses embellished over time. So we're not going to find anything out. It's very unlikely that there's any data that hasn't been found that is going to turn up. And the military themselves says there's a lack of high quality data to investigate the incident, even though there's lots of talk. So we're probably never going to know. And David Fravor's account is probably going to continue to convince people. His account is one of the things that has convinced a lot of people, including high-ups, including congressmen and senators. So it's kind of a problem, really.
Renowned
it's
critical
not something
thinkers.
We can do very much about.
Yeah. Well, I'll put this to you, I guess, in two ways. It's related. Number one, what if you wanted to evaluate all the various anecdotes and pieces of evidence for UAPs out there that behave not according to the laws of physics and do things that regular objects shouldn't do. What is the best incident or the best set of evidence for it? And then I'll follow-up question after that. Like if you were arguing against yourself.
Yeah, no, I would find it very difficult to pick one. I can't think of a good piece of evidence that demonstrates some kind of unambiguously anomalous motion. There really isn't anything out there. There are things where we don't know what they are, which are particularly interesting, like the gimbal video. We don't know what is behind that rotating glare. But yeah, it's also we know we're probably never going to find out. There are lots of famous UFO videos, like the Aguadilla video, which actually is in the news right now because it got re-released by the Customs and Border Protection, which looks like it shows something going underwater when it really doesn't. It's something that's nowhere near the water, but it's very compelling. But we can't actually prove 100% that it is this other thing. So there are these ambiguous videos, and I really cannot pick one that I think demonstrates something amazing.
Okay. So then in the past, when I've, say, been arguing with creationists and people who don't believe in evolution, there's definitely evidence out there that could make me question the current model of evolution. If we the example, it's a silly example. If we found a T-Rex skeleton with a human skeleton in its belly because it's just finished eating Homo sapiens, that would make me question the veracity of the evolution story. What would convince you that aliens walk among us? Like what kind of evidence would you go, oh, that's pretty compelling?
Well, I'd like some high fidelity evidence first, like not these blurry videos that we have, like an actual video of something where you can see surface detail on the object and it moving around and it's not a fake, which is a difficult thing to prove. I'd also like to see the bigger thing would really be evidence from multiple sources of the same event, which could be as simple as just two different people with their iPhones videoing the same flying saucer or whatever, doing amazing things up in the sky. It wouldn't actually take that much. It's not like I need to see the mothership hovering over the White House. I just need to see good quality data and data from two or more independent sources. So it really wouldn't take very much at all. 2 or 3 videos of the same event would pretty much convince me that there's something going on.
Either that, or finally we get some evidence from the UFO collection that's parked at Area 51. Is that where the Vatican or where the Italian UFO is supposed to be parked? Is that in Area 51?
It's not really clear where it's supposed to be.
Right.
There's lots of various different things like Wright-Patterson Air Force Base and various other places. But
all right, we'll make Area 51 the placeholder then.
Indeed.
So, I mean, I imagine it would take, a metallurgist less than a day to figure out, oh, this alloy doesn't actually exist on Earth, or a biologist, to say, well, this creature here, it's not DNA, and it's some other form of genetic coding that we've never seen. It wouldn't take that long. Which of course,
interesting.
Which of course is supposed to exist for the Peruvian mummies, which we'll talk about in a minute.
Well, it's interesting you give those two examples, overlapping a little bit with the Peruvian mummies. Like one of the more famous people in ufology right now is a guy called Gary Nolan, who is a professor at Stanford University, and very highly accomplished within his field, which is biology. Basically, kind of computational biology, immunology, and stuff like that. And he's been involved in investigating various kind of UFO type things. And there's two things he investigated, one of which was this supposedly alien body, where he investigated it and showed that the DNA was not in fact alien, it was just human DNA. And then the other one was metal. And he was not a metallurgist, he was a biologist, but he investigated these bits of metal And in that investigation, he's a lot more open to the idea that it might be some kind of alien thing. So, yeah, it would be great if he actually got a metallurgist to look at the metal and he's stuck with the biology. But we have very few scientists who are actually interested in studying this stuff. So, ufology kind of takes the experts where it can, even if they're not really experts in a particular field.
Yeah. I mean, if Congress brought their own alien, I imagine now, let's go to Mexico, that
Okay.
if they took those aliens and they said to biologists or geneticists, all right, do you want to sample from this body? I think at that point you'd get a lineup so long it would stretch around the entire, the outside of any university on the planet.
I don't know.
Who wouldn't want to run some DNA on your?
I think, like, if it was those aliens in the Mexican government, the ones brought out by Jamie Maussan, they know that he's a hoaxer. They know that there's a long history behind these particular models, and everyone thinks that they're fake. But yes, if the U.S. government came out and said this, then yes. But then, of course, the U.S. government would do their own tests already. They would probably contact people privately and get some tests being done. But yeah, it's the discovery of alien life would be one of the more significant events in human history. And so everybody would want to be part of that. And if there were some kind of samples that looked like that they were alien, if we got a rock back from Mars that seemed like it had some microbes on it, everybody wants to study it. So an actual piece of an actual alien would be vastly more interesting. Of course, you have to get past all the skepticism. You've got to actually convince people that this might actually be an alien. But yeah, real science would love to discover real aliens, but the evidence just isn't there.
Well, let's talk about these silly mummies. And I say silly because my training was originally as a biologist. So, we saw in the Cambrian explosion the diversification of life forms on planet Earth, and 2 arms, 2 legs, a spine, a skull, 2 eyes, a nose, and a mouth are far from the only way to organize a living being. I mean, you can have blobs, you can have things with spines, you can have your hallucigenia, you can have your there's an almost infinite number of ways to organize a body. So if we did have aliens from Alpha Centauri, what are the odds that they're going to have 2 eyes, a nose, a little tiny mouth, and look exactly like E.T. from the movies? I'm going to say 0. Nothing's ever 0. I'm going to say 0.
Well, I think you have to ask Richard Dawkins about that one. I think there's fairly strong arguments that the symmetry and the kind of essentially vertebra model is something that will evolve naturally because it's an efficient way of creating the alimentary canal, I guess. Passing things from one end of the object to the other, and then that would act as a scaffolding for other parts like movable limbs and whatnot. So there might be certain evolutionary advantages to that particular model. You can see having 3-way symmetry wouldn't be super useful, but bilateral symmetry works in a certain way. It's very good for having arms and legs.
Starfish get around not having bilateral symmetry.
But can starfish build a starship? It's I think there's certain limits to things like besides simple locomotion. You have to have. I suppose octopus would be a good one. An octopus would be they're very dexterous and pretty intelligent. So,
and spiders could do it, and they've got more than 2 eyes and more than 2 arms. So tell me about these. So I looked at that and I was instantly bullshit.
Yeah.
But the fact that they look like E.T. But of course that just proves that Hollywood is in on it. Hollywood has known for decades, and they were just. It's like your average Alex Jones conspiracy. The media has to be in on it.
Yeah, there's always an excuse. You say well, what's the odds that it would be bipedal? It's perhaps they are actually humans that have flew away in a spaceship and then evolved on another planet and then traveled back in time. So then there's an excuse ready made. You can just say that's what happened, or maybe they are the original people who seeded this planet with their own DNA, and that's why their DNA is very similar to human DNA.
Star Trek New Generation, or the Next Generation. I think that was one of the plot twists and explaining why bipedal, two-eyed, why the only difference between all these intelligent species is the shape of their ears and whether they have bumps on their forehead or not, because it was originally humanoid people who seeded the stars.
Yeah.
So
And not
clearly.
because it's a lot cheaper to do the makeup that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about the history of these mummies and the Masson guy
Yeah. So
who's
Jamie Masson is basically a TV journalist in Mexico, and he does lots and lots of shows about aliens. And he's on the Gaia channel or media outlet, which does lots of things like basically ancient aliens type stuff, like semi mystical stuff about visiting aliens and the history of aliens and UFOs and magical thinking of all kinds of things. And a few years ago, he came out first with a thing called the Roswell slides, and the Roswell slides were some photographs that were supposedly taken at Roswell of an alien body, and they showed it. It looked pretty alien. It's this fairly small thing, and then they arranged this huge kind of conference where they charged lots of people to attend. Lots of money, lots of people, lots of money to attend, and they revealed the slides, and then they released these high resolution versions of them. And then somebody took one of the high resolution versions of it and kind of zoomed in on this little placard that was for some reason next to this alien, and ran some deblurring software, and you could actually read what it says. It says like the mummified body of a 2-year-old boy. And beneath that, it was kind of donated to something you can't really read it, by somebody of California. So it's just a museum exhibit of a mummified child. And Masson had made this huge song and dance of claiming that it was this mummy, and he got a bunch of experts as well to go along with him. There was one guy whose name escapes me, but he'll come up again later, who studied the anatomy of the object and said that there's no way this is possibly human, just based on these photographs. And you fast forward a couple of years, Masson comes out with a new thing, which are what he claims to be mummified bodies of ancient aliens that he's discovered in a mine shaft somewhere, an ancient diatom mine. Not sure what that is, but it's a very dry mine. So the bodies get
diatomaceous earth,
mummified.
I think.
Yeah,
it's like what you would sprinkle to
little
kill insects,
skeletons of prehistoric algae or something, little creatures. So yeah, he comes out with these mummies and releases things like X-rays of them, and people immediately start to notice that there are problems with these. And I was one of the people who noticed this. It was back in 2017, I think. The bones looked just like human bones, except they looked like just basically human bones that had been messed with. They had a 3-fingered hand that looked exactly like what you would get if you took off the thumb of a hand and you took off the little finger and you just left with the 3 things, and then you split the skin down to here, and then you made it look like these long hands. It looked exactly the same. So there was all these issues with them, and then people were investigating that, and it kind of turned out that there was kind of a system of grave robbers who would actually take these mummies, which actually were real mummies. They were like ancient mummies that were from hundreds, if not over 1,000 years ago, which are fairly common in the region. And then they would rearrange them and then sell them to people like Jamie Masson as ancient aliens. And this was all kind of exposed, in South America to a certain degree. It was disagreed with by Masson, but he kind of just kept going. He kept releasing these types of things and keeping making claims. And he had these pet experts coming up and explaining why it couldn't possibly be a human, which obviously it couldn't because it was a human with the bones all rearranged. And then we get to where we are now with the Mexican government has this big conference, and for some reason Jamie Masson gets to reveal these fake aliens in the middle of this conference. And the other people there were a bit horrified, I think. Ryan Graves, one of the pilots who testified before the US Congress, was there, and he derided the whole thing as a sham, a big, ridiculous, fake show. And then
So he was there to
Yeah,
talk about his own experiences with
yeah,
UAPs.
he was there just to talk about like there were, you know, he had seen UFOs off the East Coast, and he's founded an organization called the Americans for Safe Aerospace, and they had been, you know, just he was trying to spread that to Mexico. He didn't know that there were going to be these aliens there. So he Masson then, like after that happened, everyone said, "Oh, that's fake." You know, they kind of derided it. He's actually since then he had this thing where he had a live like MRI of the aliens, and he had his expert standing there saying like, "Oh, this couldn't possibly be a human." Problem was, the expert he chose was the same expert who said that photograph of the mummified boy was an alien. And the things that the other people were pointing at in this MRI, saying it couldn't possibly be human, were because, like, you know, they put the bones in upside down. Like they had a leg bone where the patella, the patella end of it was where the hip should have been. So it couldn't possibly have worked. And it's, you know, so you got people saying, "Oh, this being could not possibly have moved." And Masson says that proves that it's an alien. It's just all complete nonsense, and it's pretty much universally agreed by everybody except for him that it's a ridiculous fake that's just a big distraction, basically.
So where do they find experts? Because if you follow the videos about these aliens, like so and so person from this university confirmed that this DNA was alien, and this other, you know, hair professor doctor from this other Mexican university confirmed the age of this, and another very apparently well-credentialed individual attested to the anatomy. So where do you find your expert, your expert for hire, your PhD for hire to get in on this?
Yeah, it's not clear what's actually going on. There's probably a variety of different things. There are probably some people who are like kind of true believers who are really enthusiastic about the idea that these might be aliens and somehow convince themselves that it's true. There's some people that might be in on the con. There might be people who are just, you know, like Masson, essentially just promoting it because that's his job. He's a showman who wants to do it, and he finds people who will agree to do that for him. There are other people where you can get them essentially to kind of silo their investigation. You can give them a piece of the thing, and they'll do DNA. Well, not DNA. They'll do like carbon dating on it, and they say, "Oh yeah, this is a genuine thing that's like 1,000 years old." Or you'll give somebody, you know, a bunch of the stuff all mushed up, and say do DNA analysis, and they say, "Oh well, this is only like 75% human DNA," which is because there's a whole bunch of other stuff mixed in. And you know, there's just a variety of different people involved, and they're not going to own up to it. You know, they're not going to admit that they've been conning you for years. So it's kind of like they'll just keep going. Unfortunately, you know, in 10 years' time, Jamie Masson and his experts are probably going to be proclaiming that this thing was in fact a real alien corpse. When if you really, you know, you can tell by looking at it. The average person can tell things like, you know, the finger bones, some of them are put the wrong way round. There is like ribs inside the spinal canal. There are things that just, you know, don't make any sense even for an alien.
Even on Alpha Centauri, you would need a pelvis to seat your femur into.
Indeed, yeah. So it's you know, and one of them had eggs in, but the eggs were completely solid. They didn't have a shell or anything. Like, you know, it doesn't really make any sense. And what the experts are saying doesn't make any sense. And if you got some real experts in there, move the fake experts to the side for a while and let them look into it, it would very, very rapidly be determined. Well, it's already been determined basically that they're just fakes.
I know that in paleogenetics, so where they're finding, you know, remains of bones or remains of tissue in some cases, and they're sequencing that DNA, like, for example, how they identified the Denisovan subspecies for humans. There's quite a bit of processing that needs to happen to weed out if I die and I get stuck in a cave in Siberia, bacteria are going to colonize my body, fungi are going to colonize my body, animals are going to drool on me. And so just taking a sample from my skin, putting it in a blender and running it through your DNA sequencing machine is going to give you a mix of bacterial DNA, fungal DNA, and whatever else that
Exactly.
you ground up, the eggs that the Drosophila laid on my face or whatever.
Yeah.
So to say, even if that is 30% not human DNA, okay, cool. I bet you $1,000,000 that if you sample an ancient human Peruvian mummy from 1,000 years ago, other things will have colonized that body. And if you gave it to a
Absolutely.
real geneticist, they'd figure that out in about 10 seconds.
Yeah, yeah, and the problem is they've not given it to a real geneticist. They've had the gene sampled by a real lab, but then they get this result back, and they don't really get any. No, there's it's very easy to misinterpret evidence like that.
So zooming out from individual cases, I think part of the environment that allows such rampant belief in UFOs, like aliens, as opposed to weather balloons that are drifting or other more terrestrial explanations, is an assumption that the government is lying to you. By definition, if it's a government, it's lying to you, and any evidence to the contrary is evidence that's been planted by them. And I think in the last call it 3 to 8 years, conspiracism has just run completely amok in North America and in the rest of the world. And first of all, would you agree that we're at an all-time high for sort of reflexive conspiracism?
It seems that way. I don't think people have changed so much. I just think the environment has changed to allow people's suspicions to surface much more rapidly. People have always been suspicious of the government, but I don't know if there's been a massive change in the environment or a massive change in the population. I think people are living in a time where we have social media, obviously, which has changed things. We have
and algorithms.
A former president who is a conspiracist, which isn't entirely new. There are presidents who have been somewhat conspiratorial, but this is kind of one step beyond that. And then, like you said, we have algorithms that are designed to get eyeballs. That isn't so much a problem anymore. That used to be a problem a few years ago. But the big media companies like YouTube and Facebook and Twitter, or maybe less so Twitter now, they have changed their algorithms because they recognize that they were kind of promoting this conspiratorial material inadvertently. And it was only, they said, only 1% of their content, but it kept showing up on people's feeds. And the advertisers didn't like it, and they didn't like it themselves because they thought it was bad for society and they wanted to do good. So they basically started filtering things out and stopping, guiding people down the rabbit hole with algorithms. Of course, that means that a lot of the content now has moved over to other platforms which have no such qualms, and now we have algorithms on Rumble, which is kind of growing as a video platform, as an alternative reality video platform. So yeah, there are certainly things that are happening that change the nature of the conspiracy culture.
So just as we wrap up, my question is, when I see you talking, you are very, very respectful. I mean, I wasn't suggesting that everyone who sees a UAP is schizophrenic, but immediately, just in case I was suggesting that, you shut me down. You're very careful to word things in terms of there is no evidence for that. So I'm assuming these are deliberate choices and
yeah,
to remain civil in a world where there isn't much civility left.
Yeah, it's something that kind of it took me a while to arrive at, I think. My natural inclination, of course, is to be polite to people. But then when somebody says something that's kind of stupid, my inclination is to say, that's stupid. Or, if someone says something that sounds crazy, my inclination is to say, well, that just sounds crazy. But when you start saying things like that, the problem is it shuts down the conversation. If you start just automatically just knee-jerk saying whatever you feel like, you're not really listening to the other person. You're not really trying to understand where they're coming from. So you're not really getting any kind of connection. And people can see that. If someone tells you, I saw a giant triangle fly over my head, and I say to them, well, that's just ridiculous. You must have been on drugs. Then, it's not really helpful. It doesn't help the conversation go forward. A much better approach is to ask them about what they saw, what was happening, try to get more detail. How did it make them feel? What was going on before that? What other things have they seen, and why is it interesting to them? And then tell them kind of your take on it. And you've had similar experiences, like you had your thing with the eagle/bear. I've had similar hallucinations, and I can relate those and say maybe it's something like that, maybe not. I wasn't there. But by being respectful, you have actual communication. When you're just saying your knee-jerk reaction impolitely, not only is it impolite, but it isn't actually communicating. It isn't actually doing anything valuable. You're not actually having a conversation with people. So by being respectful and by taking care not to upset people, it allows you to actually have a conversation with them and actually make some progress.
Yeah. I guess I balance that with the presence of bad faith actors who will waste an infinite amount of your time, and you will never make any progress with them, even if you were arguing that the sky is blue. So maybe the trick is figuring out who you can talk to and who you can't. Or maybe you're just reflexively more polite than I am.
Well, you kind of have to filter people out if they're being bad faith. You kind of get to see after a while. And, I will end a conversation eventually if it's not being productive, but you've got to give it a chance. You've got to give that person the opportunity to state their case, not even state their case really, just kind of chat and explain. I hate terminology that kind of gets legalistic. As if stating your case kind of implies that it's this big dispute and something's either true or it's a lie, and we have to argue and debate. But we don't. We don't have to argue and debate. We can just have discussions and try to figure things out, and that's what I try to do.
So for people who want more of your analyses of incidents, they want to follow what you have to say on items that are breaking in the news, or the next thing that comes out of Mexico, or what goes before Congress. How do people follow you and stay current with what you're thinking and investigating?
Well, probably the best place to start would be on YouTube. I have a YouTube channel which I post analyses of things. For more cutting edge stuff, there's my website, Debunked. You get to see things as they're happening, the actual investigation. Like right now, we're investigating a whole bunch of new videos that dropped from the Customs and Border Protection. And then I'm also on Twitter quite often and interacting with the UFO community, but also just posting things on Twitter. I hope to move off Twitter eventually, and I also trying to be active on Threads as well. And in all those places, I am at Mick West.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Mick. I really enjoyed this, and I think it's a super valuable part of the conversation.
Oh, thank you very much. I enjoyed the conversation.